Oh, you are sharing right on your end. I can see it's sharing now.
Yes, yes, it seems it has come up. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thanks. Afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much for joining us for this interesting presentation. So we are quite honored to have Dr. Paliani Chinguwo, who is going to be presenting to us today. So he's going to be presenting on the Mwanza War in Malawi of October 1967. So I want to quickly introduce our speaker today, Dr. Chinguwo. Is a scholar and an activist with profound commitment to social justice and preservation of history. He holds a PhD from the University of Witwatersrand, where he also got his Master of Arts in sociology from 2023 and 2021, respectively. Currently, he's serving as a director of research at the Lost History Foundation. He spearheads initiatives that are aimed at reclaiming and preserving marginalized histories and ensuring that the voices of those the oppressed find resonance in the annals of time. His role at the Lost History Foundation has been instrumental in shedding light on obscured narratives and advocating for the recognition of historical truths. So without further ado, let me give the platform to Doc to get us started.
All right. Thank you very much, Chair, for the introduction and also for inviting me to be a part of the Tuesday seminars. I don't know whether there's anything on the screen. Can you see anything? Am I sharing anything there?
Yes. Your slides are showing the first page.
Okay. Is it okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's on
My
presentation
voice,
mode.
All right. Okay. All right. No, thanks very much, Chair, for inviting me to be part of the Tuesday's seminars, and I'm excited to present on this topic today afternoon. Essentially, this presentation is drawn from a book that I've just published on the topic, and it is available on Amazon, and hard copies are also available in Malawi and as well as in South Africa. So it's just a summary, or rather a snapshot of what is contained in this book. So probably before moving forward, for those that are hearing about Malawi for the first time, is that Malawi is a country in Southern Africa. There is Mozambique on the eastern side, and also on the western side southwards. And then on the northern part, there is Tanzania and Zambia on the eastern part. So if you take the map of Africa, there's that dot there. That's where Malawi is. And we are talking about Mwanza. Mwanza is a district in the southern southern western part of Malawi. And if you can see, that arrow is pointing exactly where Malawi is. And we are calling it Mwanza War because it happened in that district in Malawi. So for the sake of those that probably are not familiar with where Malawi is and the district of Mwanza where we can particularly locate it. So in this presentation, we are reframing what we call the Mwanza War in three aspects. Firstly is to reframe it from a national security episode to a Southern Africa Cold War story. And secondly, we are reframing the event from a localized military encounter that happened in Malawi in 1967 to a transnational liberation era conflict. And the central proposition that we are putting forward is that this event, which we are referring to as the Mwanza War, in Malawi that occurred in 1967 October cannot be fully understood outside the wider regional and global context. So basically, that's the key message. And then there are key guiding questions in this presentation from the historical aspect of it, as well as from the interpretive aspect of it. And in the historical aspect of it, we are asking what really happened in Malawi, in this district of Mwanza, in the southwestern part of the country in October 1967. And secondly, who were the principal actors in this event? And lastly, why did it happen? And then when we go to the interpretive questions, we are asking, how did the Cold War shape this event? And what external connections mattered to this event? And lastly, how should the Mwanza War be remembered in Malawi as well as in Southern Africa? So, as a matter of political and regional context, to understand the event itself, is that we look at two aspects: the Malawi at country level, as well as the region, the Southern Africa. So at that time, we had the authoritarian one-party political order under Dr. Kamuzu Banda, and then there was the consolidation of state power by Dr. Kamuzu Banda, and the political dissent was not possible. Opposition was heavily crushed by the state in the context of the one-party state era. And then the event which we are calling the Mwanza War came in as part of the wider struggle over the direction that the new state had taken. Mind you, Malawi attained independence on 6 July 1964. So by 1967, we had this kind of development in as far as the country was concerned. And then when you look at the Southern African context at that time, is that we had anti-colonial and liberation struggles that were reshaping the region. Southern Rhodesia, South Africa, Namibia, and Mozambique. And at that time, Tanzania and Zambia, the two countries which were independent in the region at that time, including Malawi as well, were important bases for the liberation movement, excluding Malawi when it comes to the contribution towards liberation movement. So Tanzania and Zambia, that's where you had the comrades from South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique, getting into Tanzania and Zambia to mobilize for their struggle in their respective countries. At the same time, Cold War rivalries intersected within these political struggles in the region, and the regional borders did not prevent the movement of people, whether undocumented or documented, as well as the movement of ideas and arms, because when the comrades get to Tanzania and Zambia, that's where they would mobilize arms and then get the arms to either Namibia, South Africa, and also Southern Rhodesia for the struggle, for the armed struggle. So that's the picture in terms of the political and the regional context. And then just before 1967 October, we had the Malawi, which was called the Nyasaland. Before independence, 1964, it was Nyasaland. And we had a political party that was leading the struggle for independence, the Nyasaland African Congress, which in 1959, September, it became to be called the Malawi Congress Party. And that's the party that ushered in independence or led the struggle until independence in 1964. So all along the 1940s, 1944, when the Nyasaland African Congress was formed, up to 1962, the posture of this political movement was that was a Pan-African posture, whereby the comrades agreed to say, let's mobilize support from the other countries that had attained independence, and then when we get our own independence, we should be able to render the same assistance or support to other countries or other territories where colonial rule would still be intact. So that was the posture up to until 1962. 1961, there were elections. So the Malawi Congress Party became the ruling party, but still under the colonial rule. So 1963, just before independence, 1964, there was that status of self-government. So you are still not yet independent, but you are a self-governing, country. It's still called Nyasaland. That's when the posture gravitated from that Pan-African stance towards fraternizing with the colonial and racist regimes that were in Southern Africa at that time. And that triggered negative reactions from activists, the liberation movements, and Pan-Africanists that, look, our comrades in Nyasaland are about to get independence, but then they have shifted towards fraternizing with the Ian Smith regime in Southern Rhodesia, the Portuguese in Mozambique, and apartheid in South Africa. So that even internally was also a bone of contention within the party itself and within the country. And that would be one of the reasons why we had what is called the cabinet crisis in September 1964. There were quite a number of issues, but one of the issues was this foreign policy issue, which I've just explained, where the cabinet ministers rose up and presented their grievances or resentments to the Prime Minister, Dr. Kamuzu Banda, on this question of shifting the posture from the Pan-African stance to fraternizing with the colonial and racist rule or regimes in Southern Africa. And the result was that cabinet ministers were fired and some resigned. And one of the ministers resigned in solidarity with their fellow cabinet ministers that had been fired. 3 of them had been fired, and then 3 others, 4 resigned, and in solidarity. So one of the ministers who resigned in solidarity was Yatuta Chisiza, who then becomes the leader of the armed struggle, the Mwanza War that we are talking about. And amidst this crisis in the cabinet, there was almost all, except probably 1 or 2 ministers, fled the country. And there were some members of parliament that had also sympathized with the cabinet ministers on this question and many other issues. Civil servants, they were hunted down and they fled the country to Zambia and others to Tanzania, and then their relatives or their property was, confiscated. Arrests were made for those that could not flee the country. In 1964, 1965, were arrested, and others disappeared just like that. But the lucky ones managed to cross the border in thousands to Zambia and Tanzania. So when then that's the consolidation of power now, amidst as the aftermath of the cabinet crisis of 1964. And those that fled were then asking themselves to say, look, we are here in exile in Zambia, in Tanzania, our property has been confiscated, our houses burnt, some of our relatives are being arrested, harassed, and the arson property and so on and so forth. And this is a war. The state has started a war against us. And it seems that there are no avenues for engagement and to discuss and to engage further. So what do we do? So those that went to Zambia, others proceeded to Tanzania, and then they decided to go for an armed struggle against the authoritarian one-party state in Malawi. So military training began in Tanzania with the support of the government of Tanzania, and then others went to China, others went to Algeria, Cuba, USSR for military training. And those were the countries where, at the same time, the freedom fighters from Southern Rhodesia, South Africa were also going to the same countries for their military training, and they could engage. Some of them, went to the same training bases in these countries. And then by 1966, second half, they were back in Tanzania, and they formed a group called the Saigon Group after the events in Vietnam. Yatuta Chisiza was a minister of Home Affairs, resigned in the cabinet 1964, became the leader of this Saigon group, and himself had gone to China, where he attended military training for 5 months or so. Then in January, the Saigon group becomes a political party called Umozi Ufuru Malawi Africa. In English, we can translate it as Unity, Freedom, Malawi Africa. And this was a socialist, or others call it a communist political party, if you look at their manifesto and everything. So July, they moved to Zambia, and they camped at Zapu. Zapu from Southern Rhodesia had just established a camp somewhere from Lusaka as you go to Kabwe, somewhere on the way, about 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers on the way. There was one Zimbabwean who had a farm, so they were using that farm in Zambia as a camp. So that's where they acquired the military weapons from Zapu and did some trainings there. And it is also written that the ANC in Lusaka, the African National Congress, provided some financial support to the leader of this movement before they started off to Malawi. And interestingly, the day they arrived in Lusaka on 31st July 1967, on their way to Malawi, as Zapu and the ANC fighters had just left Lusaka to cross the Zambezi River in what is called the Wanki campaign, the first military campaign by the ANC, which involved the Chris Hannis and the like. It was a joint to say, okay, Zapu, let's have this joint campaign. We get into Southern Rhodesia, and then the ANC cadres or Unkoto Wesizwe, they would proceed to South Africa for a military campaign. So they had just left, and then these ones were arriving to camp at the ZANU camp. Then fast forward, 17 of them, others were left behind, entered Malawi through the district of Mwanza on 31st September 1967. And their mission was clear: to fight against the authoritarian one-party state, fight against capitalism and imperialism. So this, at this time when they were entering Malawi, 3 weeks had just elapsed after Southern Rhodesia, with support from state security officials in South Africa, had neutralized the ZAPU ANC fighters who had just crossed over the Zambezi. So the Southern Rhodesia state security had, extracted intelligence from the ZAPU ANC fighters, and then you have this message or news that a similar kind of incursion had also happened in Malawi, and Malawi was an ally of Southern Rhodesia. I explained that in my earlier slides at that time. So fast forward, what happened is that 2 were shot dead, including the leader, Yatuta Chisiza. 9 were captured by the state, went for trial, and they were hanged later on. 5 of them managed to retreat to Zambia, and 1 of them allegedly shot himself. That is according to state reports. But there were also reports that serious casualties were encountered, or the state security officials, Malawi, encountered serious casualties during this, what we call the Mwanza War. So basically, that's the story, in short, of what happened. So going towards the end, we can talk about the foreign support on the government side. Addressing Parliament on the 12th December 1967, the president of the country, Dr. Kamuzu Banda, made this remark. He told the Parliament that when news of Yatuta's invasion, and this is these 17 people that entered the country, when the news of Yatuta's invasion of this country reached our friends in October 1967, I got offers of assistance from at least 5 countries. And he told Parliament that we have friends, and we are not alone in the fight against these people. And we have a publication by Thomas, The Secret History of the Mossad, which also provides some evidence that Israel provided intelligence support to the Malawi government. And to quote exactly from the book, it's to say that Mossad successfully thwarted a plot that had received the backing from China aimed at overthrowing the pro-Western regime of Dr. Kamuzu Banda. And mind you, the leader of these 17 people, armed fighters, had spent also time in China, and from the Chinese embassy in Lusaka, they also received financial support. So in a nutshell, actors, networks, and interest. In Malawi, we have Yatuta Chisiza and the armed fighters, the Malawi government and armed security forces, as well as local communities, civilian population on one hand. Beyond Malawi, we have Tanzania, Zambia as places of refugee and mobilization, ZAPU and ANC connections, as I've explained, the military trainings and support that they got from China, Algeria, Cuba, USSR, and the wider Cold War environment, and the allies that offered support to Malawi government, as I just explained in my previous slides. And then moving towards the end, Chair, is to draw some parallels between the revolutionary Che Guevara and Yatuta Chisiza. Che Guevara from Argentina, who was part of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. So both revolutionaries who took up arms against governments that they believed represented oppression and imperialism. The other one in Cuba and the other one in Malawi. And this period, 1963-64, they were both serving as cabinet ministers, and they both resigned from their ministerial positions and traveled abroad immediately. They both were in Dar es Salaam at the same period, end of November. Che Guevara was coming from Congo after a futile attempt to fight against a capitalist or pro-Western government in DR Congo, which we call DR Congo today. He returned to Dar es Salaam towards the end of November 1965. During that period, Yatuta Chisiza was preparing to travel to China for military training. So their lives crossed paths, although they didn't meet, but they were in Dar es Salaam at the same time. And they were both shot dead by security forces within a space of hours. Che Guevara, 9 October 1967, and then 11th of October, Yatuta Chisiza gets shot dead, and thousands of miles apart. After their deaths, their bodies were taken to hospitals where members of the public were invited to view their bullet-ridden corpses as proof that they had been eliminated. And here we see a front-page newspaper from Malawi about crowds waiting for hours to see a bullet-riddled body of Yatuta Chisiza, the leader. And exactly same thing happened in Bolivia with Che Guevara. And Che Guevara, there's a quotation from him after the Cuban Revolution, where he said, "We have demonstrated that a small group of determined men supported by the people and without fear of dying, if necessary, can defeat a disciplined regular army." And this was the inspiration of Yatuta Chisiza and his comrades when they embarked on this armed struggle against the one-party state in Malawi. And in his own words, Yatuta Chisiza wrote to say, "I believe that my life is no more precious than hundreds who have fallen or shed their blood for this struggle against capitalist and authoritarian rule in the country." He's talking about Malawi. So these are parallels that we can draw from the two revolutionaries, Che Guevara and Yatuta Chisiza. So what does the war add to Southern African history? We are saying it connects Malawi to the wider history of African liberation and the Cold War politics. Secondly, it complicates the distinction between a domestic rebellion against the authoritarian one-party state in Malawi and the international conflict that is the Cold War. In conclusion, Mwanza War was not an isolated episode. Its actors, networks, and political meanings crossed national boundaries. The Cold War itself provides an essential analytical lens, but not the only one, of course. And Chair, that marks the end of my presentation. And here is a picture of Yatuta Chisiza on the left with Robert Mugabe on the right. And that was around 1962. Yatuta Chisiza had traveled to Southern Rhodesia as an official of the Malawi Congress Party to visit the ZAPU in Southern Rhodesia. It was just before the formation of the ZANU later, a few months later. So they met, they interacted, and tried to foster, synergies and connections in the struggles between Southern Rhodesia and the Nyasaland in Malawi. And this was a time when the Malawi Congress Party had that Pan-African posture, networking with the liberation movements in the region, one of which would be the liberation movements in Southern Rhodesia. So that marks the end of my presentation, Chair, and I would welcome questions or comments or inputs if there are any. Many thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc, for that important and fascinating presentation on the Mwanza War and how it's connected to the Cold War and also I think the struggle for liberation. I think there are quite a lot of interesting alliances that you have connected there. Within Southern Africa, but also even outside Southern Africa, which I think was quite interesting. So let me open this up to questions, comments for Doc. If there are any questions or comments for Doc. Online colleagues. I think maybe as we wait, I can kickstart the conversation, Doc. I was interested in the implications of this particular war within Malawi, but also even in surrounding neighboring countries. And I wanted to know if this Mwanza War enabled Kamuzu Banda, the regime, the president, then to consolidate political power and entrench authoritarianism, or maybe it sowed some seeds for continuous resistance within Malawi, but also even in neighboring countries. I just wanted maybe your thoughts with regards to that.
All right, thanks. Actually, it did result in both the consolidation of power on the part of Dr. Kamuzu Banda to say, yes, we had the cabinet crisis 1964, which shook the country, and then the armed struggle that followed 1967. So it triggered the shift towards more and more consolidation of power, to the extent that a process began to make Dr. Kamuzu Banda the life president of the country for life. So in 1971, the constitution was changed to allow that he becomes the life president, to say whatever happens, even if people come and do whatever, he remains the president of the country until he dies. So that was would be an aftermath of the events of 1967. On the other part, the event itself inspired others to take the struggle further, the struggle against the one-party state, to say, look, if these ones had sacrificed their lives, took arms, get to the country to challenge Dr. Banda head on, we can also do the same, probably maybe using a different approach or strategy. Mind you, 5 of them managed to escape without trace from the battlefield through Mozambique back to Tanzania, and they became part of the movement that kind of did some sort of soul searching to say the armed struggle failed, so what next? And then they agreed to establish a socialist political party in exile called the Socialist League of Malawi. In short, it was called Lesoma. So these five became the founding members, or were part of the founding members of this new political party in exile, to take the struggle further. And it continued to exist until 1992, thereabout, when with other formations in exile, they merged to form a different political movement from Zambia, that is. So yes, it played two roles, consolidation of power on one hand, as well as inspiring others to take the struggle further. And the formation of this Lesoma PAP as a political party in exile emanated from, or was influenced, amongst others, by the five comrades that had survived the event of 1967, so to speak. Over to you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doc, for your response. I don't know, colleagues online, if you might have. Yes, I see Benson. Go ahead. Benson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Doc, for the presentation. Yeah, Benson P. from Malawi. I want to understand their allegations, their stories that one of the key issues, social issues that affected this was the user fees for health services and even other social services. So I want to learn from this history to say, was this really one of the key issues that prompted the struggle? And then, if it is one of the issues, then one would say the user fees issue and even free services for the population have been part and parcel of our history up to date. So, for instance, if one talks about user fees, it is a thorny issue and a very sensitive issue. So if it is true, then it is drawn from that history where free for services are opted than user fees, because if it is alleged that it was one of the issues that prompted the struggle. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Oh, sorry, Chair. Sorry, Chair.
So no, that's fine. I was thinking maybe we could take Takuzo's question as well. Then you respond to the two of them,
okay,
and then we take the next round of questions. Yes, Takuzo, go ahead. Yeah, before Doc responds.
Thank you very much, Chair and Doctor, for a powerful presentation. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe was removed from power in 2017, and Emerson immediately took over as president. And when he became president, he then said we need to revisit our history, because some of the people who were vilified by Robert Mugabe, the likes of Ndabaningi Stole, when he died during Mugabe's tenure, he was not declared a national hero. But when Emerson came, he said we have to revisit our history, regardless of the squabbles that were between us as nationalists. So he then declared him a national hero. So I would want to ask you, is there any leader after Kamuzu Banda who sees the issue of Yatuta Chisiza, who viewed the issue of Yatuta Chisiza differently? And if so, how are they viewing it? Are they also being remorse on him? Since if I heard you well, you said that some ministers resigned in support of their ministers who were fired. So is there any leader after Kamuzu Banda in Malawi who also felt remorse for them, or who viewed history in a different way as Kamuzu was viewing it?
Thank you,
Okay.
Taku. Yes, Doc, go ahead.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll start with the question from Benson. Yes, as I mentioned in the presentation, that the event of 1967, the Mwanza War, emanates from what is called the cabinet crisis of 1960. Okay, the Mwanza War of 1967 emanates from the cabinet crisis of 1964, where Prime Minister Dr. Kamuzu Banda and his ministers had differences on policy issues, quite a number of issues, one of which was the foreign policy issue, which had also, caused anger, resentment in the broader Pan-African and liberation struggle in Southern Africa and the region. There were other issues, one of which is what you have just mentioned, that before independence, hospitals, there were when people go to access health services, they were not required to pay for the services, right? Now, immediately after independence or towards independence, the government introduced user fees to say everyone, you go to public hospitals, you must pay a ticket. They used to call it a ticket, the currency at that time. So this angered people to say, look, during the colonial era, free health services. Now we are independent. We thought things would be better when it comes to healthcare, but now we are required to pay for the services. So that was one of the issues that were suppressed just for the sake of independence. But when we got independence, July, August, the cabinet ministers had the courage to present the issues to Dr. Banda to say, no, look, when we go to the villages to do our work, to the communities, this is what we are facing in terms of feedback from people when it comes to user fees at the hospitals. There were other issues like Africanization, slow pace, right? To say most of the positions that were being held in the civil service, top positions were occupied by Europeans, the British. So for people, independence meant that there would be a faster pace to get rid of the Europeans and to pave way for the Africans who were qualified and had the experience to take over the positions in the civil service. But Dr. Banda, as a prime minister, had a different view of delaying the Africanization, the pace for Africanization. And this was also one of the issues that caused resentment amongst some of the people in the country. And the one that really hurt the civil servants was the introduction or the slashing of salaries, right? June 1964, end of month, civil servant gets his salary so much. Independence, 6 July 1964, end of the month, in July 1964, the salary gets cut, right? For others, it was cut by 1/3. For others, almost half, right? The reason was that there was a study just before independence done by a researcher called Skinner. So he produced a report, which is famously called the Skinner's report. And it recommended that a newly independent country, the salaries for the civil servants, especially for the Africans, were too high, that the newly independent country could not sustain. So one of the recommendations was to curtail, or rather to cut, the salaries for the Africans as immediately after independence. And this really hurt the civil servants. And the cabinet ministers raised these issues, including the foreign policy issue, right? To say this is what we are getting from the ground, and these are the issues. And some of the civil servants, because of the fees at the hospitals and the salary issue, they rallied behind the cabinet ministers to say, I think these ones are speaking for us. But now the challenge was that others went behind to talk to the prime minister, say, no, look, these ones are not really concerned about about the grievances from the masses. They are actually power hungry. They just want to dislodge you and take over. So watch out. So by then there were others who foresaw that if Dr. Banda gets rid of these cabinet ministers, it would be their time to take over the positions, and then that messed up everything. So yes, Benson, the fees for health services was one of the contentious issues that contributed to the cabinet crisis, and how Dr. Banda responded to get rid of some of the cabinet ministers, and the others in solidarity resigned. Now, to Takudzwa's question, is there any leader that probably came in after Dr. Banda to take a different posture towards reviewing the history or recognizing those that fought in the Mwanza War? The answer is yes. Immediately after Dr. Kamuzu Banda, 1994, May, he was voted out. So we had Dr. Bakili Muluzi, who came in as a democratically elected president in 1994. And what does he do? Remember, I talked about the five who survived on the part of the fighters who survived and retreated, went back to Zambia. They were part of the struggle against the one-party state from Zambia in exile. So their colleagues those who were captured, the 9, were tried and hanged. It was treason, so one-party state could not entertain people getting arms and fighting against the state. So they were hanged. Now, these ones, the 5 who are in exile, they are active. And then 91, political change in Zambia. KK is out of power, and that becomes an inspiration amongst the Malawians in exile to say, yeah, it has happened in Zambia. A one-party state or a leader that had been there since independence has been removed, and there's now democracy. We can replicate the same in our country, in Malawi. If Zambians have done it, we can also do it across the border. So that's what happened in Zambia in 91 when KK gets out of power and the new democratically elected president takes over in the name of Chilua, inspired the struggle against the one-party state in Malawi. And really, trade unions jumped in, joined the struggle, and other formations in exile, and the one-party state was shaken, such that the spaces opened up for mass mobilization towards multi-party democracy. In 93, a referendum was held whether Malawians need democracy or one-party state to continue, and overwhelmingly it was for multi-party democracy. So 14 June 1993, that's when we reverted to multi-party democracy. And then the amnesty, July 93, was put forward that all those who were in exile for political reasons, you have been forgiven, you can come back to the country and participate in the process for democratization. Elections were scheduled for 1994 May, so it meant that anyone in exile or in jail for political reasons, you have an amnesty. So this included the 5 who had who had escaped to Zambia and had a case to answer, a treason case to answer in Malawi. Amnesty applied to them, so they were able to come back in 93 to participate in the democratization process. And Dr. Bakili Muluzi won the elections, and what he did was that in his first cabinet, 1994, after becoming the president, he appointed one of the 5 to become one of his ministers. This is George Kanyanya. He was one of the 5 who fought in the Mwanza War, survived, went to exile, continued in the struggle against the one-party state, came in 93 after the amnesty, leading a political formation from exile, right? And then when the new president comes in, he appoints him in his cabinet, the first cabinet, and he served for 5 years until 1999, thereabout, when he left cabinet. And also one of the 5, Frank Gia, right? He was appointed to be chair of the board. We have a power utility company called Eskom in Malawi. Of course, in South Africa, there's a K, but in Malawi, it's a C, Eskom. So he was appointed to be the chair of the board of the power utility company in 1994 as a recognition of their contribution to the fight against the one-party state, which is considered or was considered as part of the struggle for democracy. So I would say, yes, we had this leader, Dr. Muluzi, who recognized these 2 survivors from the 1967 event to be part of his government, one as a cabinet minister, the other one as chair of board, power utility company called Eskom. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. I think we can open up to other round of questions. I don't know, Benson, I see your hand is still up. Maybe it's a follow-up question, or maybe it's a legacy hand. But I also wanted to ask Doc, maybe with regards to how maybe scholars and maybe yourself, in terms of your framing of Yatuta Chisiza. I think, of course, there could be differences in terms of how he is framed, whether maybe some people would want to frame him primarily as a failed rebel, as a political dissent, or as a continuation of maybe the unfinished struggle over what maybe post-colonial Malawi should have become. I think that's one thing that I wanted to pick from you. And then the other issue relates also to the contradiction that Banda, maybe as a leader, took. Because in most newly independent African countries in Southern Africa, I think most of them actually took a very Marxist, socialist kind of ideology until later on, maybe in the 90s, when the structural adjustment programs were imposed by the Bretton Woods institutions. What could possibly explain Banda's early adoption of these neoliberal capitalist kind of ideologies of introducing user fees and also being sort of reproducing the kind of colonial structures of governance in the civil service? I see, I think, Crispin, go ahead, and Benson, I think, had a follow-up as well.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Dr. Chinguwo. Very sort of very interesting sort of take there. So I came in late, but I have a question on Dr. Banda. So I think you have highlighted that he was a bit cautious in terms of the transformation, in terms of black sort of the maybe we try to call it decolonization, or maybe the sort of he was a bit cautious. The example that you have gave in terms of the reforms in the terms of the civil servant. So what is intriguing for me is that when you look at the Banda, it was Kamuzu Banda in Malawi, Joshua Nkomo in Zimbabwe, and Kenneth Kaunda in Zambia, in terms of the struggle for, especially against the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. And actually, ironically, Banda was actually the spokesman of these sort of like 3 sort of nationalist sort of like leader, actually, if I remember very well. Banda was actually, Dr. Banda was actually the spokesman for this sort of, so what happened to Dr. Banda? How did he sort of like, in a way, this sort of like cautious and very conservative sort of like in a way stance. At what point did he sort of like in a way did this transition sort of like that's the point that I'm missing, and also what about the role of civic society? How connected was this to this struggle, like especially trade union movement? I think about here Chafukwa Chihana here in terms of maybe where do we sort of like in a way in both before the struggle for independence and also the struggle for democracy against the one party state, where do we put civic society, like the trade union movement? We're thinking of sort of like in a way leaders like Chafukwa Chihana, for example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know, Benson, if you had a follow-up or maybe it was a legacy hand.
Yeah, just a comment, a question or a comment to say, yeah, this struggle, this historical struggle, would we say was a recipe for peace? Because since then, Malawi, it is called a home heart of Africa, and it has been at peace up to now. Was this a recipe for peace, for lasting peace?
Thank you, Benson. Yeah, Doc, I think you can
Okay.
respond.
All right. Thanks for more interesting questions that have come in. Yes. In terms of framing, Chair. Yeah, there are, as you put it, it can be framed in different ways. Officially, for the state, at that time when it happened, it was framed as a failed struggle. These were rebels, enemies of the state. They came, we have crushed them, and that's the end of the story. So even people to ask, to understand what really happened for these people to take arms and get into the country, you could be arrested. Even journalists could not write. There was a script that was given to say, this is how you report the event, how it happened, and there was the official narrative was you come in the country to challenge the government. This is how we are going to do it. We are going to crush you and all that, and these are rebels, and anyone heard talking positive about the struggle, yeah, you would disappear or you'd be arrested. So this is what transpired, and the framing, the official narrative. Now the book comes to challenge that official narrative, to get deeper, to understand the motivation, why they took up arms, and what were their, what was their manifesto, what were they advancing, and so to speak, something which could not be documented in the country when it comes to the media and the official narrative and so on and so forth. So that's how it can also be looked at, to say it was a failed struggle, it was a rebellion, these were rebels, and treason, they deserved it. Those that were hanged and so on and so forth, they had to be hanged because they were rebels without a cause. But for themselves, because we had one of them, one of the 17, is still alive, and that was is the key informant, one of the most key informant, yeah, so to speak, who sat with us, explained how it all happened, where they came from, the motivations, and so on and so forth. That's when you begin to understand, and appreciate an alternative narrative about the whole armed struggle, which is contrary to the official version. The contradiction of Banda as policies, so to speak. Yes, as Prof. Chinguwo put it, that Dr. Kamuzu Banda was the spokesperson of these key leaders in the liberation movement. He was respected, so to speak, and he spoke Pan-African and so on and so forth. That was indeed the case until around 1962, after he became the de facto prime minister following the elections in 1961. What happened, that remains a key question for which we need answers. And that was the bone of contention, or a burning issue at the OAU Heads of State Summit that was held in July 1964 in Cairo. As a newly independent country, the first OAU Heads of State Summit Malawi had participated was later in July, 2 weeks after independence in Cairo. And this was the question that was being raised in the summit, just as Prof. Chinguwo has put it, to say, but you, Malawi, you were the champion of the Pan-African struggle, liberation and so on and so forth. And those of us who had been independent supported you in your struggle. And here you are, you have attained the independence and you turn your back against the liberation movements in the region. What is happening, right? And truly, records show Ghana at some point provided 10,000 US dollars to Malawi Congress Party ahead of the 1961 elections as part of the campaign. And they used that money to buy brand new Land Rovers from Southern Rhodesia, which were driven, 10 of them from Salisbury in Southern Rhodesia all the way to Blantyre, Malawi, to assist in the campaign nationwide for the elections in 1961. And that's how independent countries did, or what they did to the struggle in the country. And it was really a shock to other countries, that change of posture. For Dr. Kamuzu Banda, in his address, in his engagement at the OAU summit, he said, yeah, look, my country is landlocked, right? We don't have a port, so we have to rely on Mozambique, and you're talking about the Portuguese as the colonial masters, so to speak, there. And South Africa as well. So geographically, we are disadvantaged. That's the argument that he put forward at the OAU, to say, my country is geographically disadvantaged. It can't afford to stay away from the colonial regimes in Mozambique, in Southern Rhodesia, and apartheid South Africa. I have to befriend these regimes for the economic survival of my country, which is landlocked. And that's the argument that he put forward. So the other heads of states tried to reason with him to say, okay, if you're talking about the port, there's Tanzania up north, which also has ports which you can use. And they couldn't convince him, right? And his Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time seemed to be understanding, or towed the line that the other heads of states were raising. And that was also what angered Dr. Kamuzu Banda then, to the extent that the Foreign Affairs Minister was one of the ministers who were fired from cabinet. So as far as Dr. Kamuzu Banda is concerned, that's the argument that he put forward to why that sudden change of posture that shocked the rest of the independent African countries. Specifically, when did that happen? We can date it around 1962, because 63, 1st of February, that's when the British, after negotiations, they reached a deal to say, okay, Nyasaland, you can become a self-governing country, meaning that you have the Prime Minister, but still the Queen of England becomes or remains the head of state through the Governor General in the country. So end of 62, beginning of 63, that's when it became clear that, Nyasaland or Malawi is now transitioning from this posture of advancing the Pan-African struggle to something that is opposite. And those were some of the grievances that the ministers also raised, to say on policy issues, Dr. Banda could just wake up and starts implementing or takes the country to the direction that he feels personally fit, without the consultations with the cabinet ministers. And like this one, they ministers at that time explained that they were not part and parcel of the decision of the policy shift. It was Dr. Banda himself deciding and shifting, and hence the coming in of the cabinet crisis immediately after independence. Yes, then the question of the civil society, Chihana, Chakufa Chihana, yes, a renowned trade unionist in the region, Southern Africa. Yeah, 62, 63, thereabouts, yes. We had a vibrant, at the scale of Malawi, civil society. Trade unions were there, and they had been part of the struggle for independence in terms of staging strikes in support of the nationalist struggle, which the Malawi Congress Party was advancing as a leader of society in terms of waging the struggle. So trade unions were active in that struggle, and some of the prominent trade unionists at that time was this Chakufa Chihana. He was leading a trade union called Commercial and Allied Workers Union, which was organizing the factories and the companies, and that's where strikes were waged in support of the struggle for independence. And quite a number of trade union leaders were arrested in the state of emergency that was declared 1959 March, right, when the struggle was now at the climax. Leaders of the party leading the struggle were arrested, detained, and amongst them were trade union leaders that were detained. So immediately towards the 1964 cabinet crisis, the trade unions some of the trade unions took a different posture, of advancing what the cabinet ministers were, standing for in terms of foreign policy and other issues. But then together they were crushed by the state. And some of the people that went into exile in 1964 as a result of the cabinet crisis were trade union leaders. So the likes of Chakufa Chihana that Prof has mentioned was amongst those trade union leaders who fled the country into exile. But then eventually, a few years later, he was kidnapped, something like that, in Kenya, brought to the country, detained for 7 years or so, and then released in 1977. Immediately, he fled out of the country, where he eventually became the General Secretary of the Southern Africa Trade Union Coordination Council, the regional body that represents workers in Southern Africa, until '92, when he decided to openly challenge the one-party state. He was arrested, and then the rest is history. So yeah, we had a vibrant trade union movement during the colonial era that participated actively in the struggle against, or the struggle for independence, and they were amongst the victims of the cabinet crisis emanating from the response that Dr. Banda took following the cabinet crisis of 1964. Amongst the victims would be prominent trade union leaders. Recipe, okay, Malawi peace, let's say, okay, events of 1967, nothing else happened. Can we talk about peace? Because nothing in terms of armed struggle happened afterwards. Because of Malawi being a strong ally, because it was a strong ally of apartheid South Africa up to until 92, 93, when the politics changed, right? And Southern Rhodesia as well. So Malawi enjoyed significant, security support, financial support from apartheid South Africa. The capital city of Lilongwe the new capital city was constructed using funds or loans from apartheid South Africa, right? And in terms of security, yeah, there was a cooperation between Southern Rhodesia and the apartheid South Africa in terms of security to make sure that nothing of the sort of the intervention that happened in 1967 gets to happen again. Because if Malawi fell, it meant that the posture of apartheid South Africa and Southern Rhodesia would also be destabilized. So the peace that we can probably talk about Malawi being peaceful for almost 28 years, 25 years after 1967, some of the factors would be the economic and security support that Malawi enjoyed from apartheid South Africa, because it was to the interest of the posture that Malawi took, or Dr. Banda imposed on Malawi in terms of foreign policy, was of particular interest to apartheid South Africa, because the liberation movements in Southern Rhodesia, South Africa, could not seek refuge in Malawi, because Malawi was a strong ally of South Africa, so they could be easily hunted and handed back to apartheid South Africa. So it was to the interest of apartheid South Africa to have Malawi, strong in terms of stability, so that there's no disruption. So probably that would explain the absence of another kind of armed struggle against the one-party state from 67 all the way to 92, so to speak. Let me stop there, Chair. Over to you. Many thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doc, for that. Maybe we can squeeze in the last round of question. And I also wanted to kickstart that with Banda and Malawi's relations with Tanzania during that particular time. I think from most of the sources that I've read myself have shown that I think the relations between Banda, Malawi, and Tanzania were deeply affected through, I think, maybe the regional policy that Banda had already taken and the choices that he had made. And I think Tanzania responded by supporting the Malawian exiles, which I think maybe also in part facilitated that kind of a rebellion. So do you think that maybe this had a role in the Mwanza rebellion? Then I also wanted to add to that with regards to the production of knowledge, historical knowledge, especially after Banda had already declared himself the life president. And to what extent can we maybe understand how his history and historical narratives became distorted, maybe after Banda it started controlling historical narratives about maybe the Mwanza rebellion, but also about the figure of Chisiza and some of his colleagues. I don't know, colleagues, maybe there might be one or two last questions for Doc. I think this will be our last round.
Okay, as we wait for the others, can you repeat the second question? The second question, Chair. Yeah.
The second question was basically about Banda's authoritarian control of historical narratives. And I was just curious to know how might this have affected our understanding of the Mwanza rebellion or the Mwanza War, but also even the figure of Chisiza and some of his colleagues who revolted against Banda. Because I think we see maybe distortion of historical narratives after Banda asserted his control over the production of historical knowledge, especially with him declaring himself the life president of the country and of the party as well. Yeah,
All
I think
right.
maybe that will be our
Okay.
last questions, Doc.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So the Tanzania really played a critical role in the events of 1967, as explained. That's where the mobilization for the armed struggle happened, and the government of Tanzania itself provided the basic military training, the first military training for those who had decided to challenge Dr. Banda militarily, was received in Tanzania under the auspices of the government of Tanzania, right? So that is the role that Tanzania played towards the events that came to be known as the Mwanza War, and that was also their base. From Tanzania, the others went to China for training and came back, mobilized from Tanzania, and it was a refuge, so to speak, to be in Tanzania when you have fled Malawi on political reasons. And the ministers themselves, the ex-ministers, those that had left Malawi, almost all of them, all of them, they converged in Tanzania, and the Tanzanian government, received them well. They were given government vehicles and even houses. They were treated like high-ranking government officials in Tanzania. They were staying in suburbs, right? They were given a stipend every month for their survival as they coordinated the Malawians that had fled to Tanzania in terms of gravitation towards the armed struggle. So that's how Tanzania, the role that Tanzania played in the mobilization and the preparation for the events in Mwanza later on in 67. And really that affected the relations in terms of foreign policy or diplomatic relations between Malawi and Tanzania, because there would be a speech, there's a speech that Dr. Kamuzu Banda openly made to say, any country that is harboring rebels who are geared to destabilize Malawi, we are going to fight against that country, and we'll be the first ones to bomb that country before those people start off to come to Malawi and destabilize our country. And he was referring to Tanzania, because that's where most of the Malawians who had fled on political grounds were staying. Now, the historical narrative, yes, there was quite a lot of distortion of our history after the 1967 events. The one-party state had to create a particular narrative to project Dr. Kamuzu Banda as a semi-god, invisible, someone who cannot be defeated, and so on and so forth. So the history suffered in terms of the knowledge, the understanding, the appreciation of the events of cabinet crisis leading to the events in 1967. One of which would be the two that were shot dead in the battlefield during the crossfire and all that on the 11th of October, where they were buried. Up to now, nobody knows where the leader, Yatuta Chisiza himself, was buried, and his colleague, Lutengano Mahimba. He was one of the high-ranking civil servants at independence in 1964. He was an economist. He had obtained a master's degree, and as of 1964, probably the whole country, we had probably 5, if not 6, Malawians who had attained master's degree as of 1964 when we were attaining independence. And him, Mwahimba, was one of the 6. and he was a high-ranking government official in the Ministry of Finance. And he left all that, fled to exile, went for military training in Cuba, and came back armed with the Yatuta Chisiza, and together they were shot dead. They died in the battlefield, and their bodies were taken to a hospital for people to come and view. From there, where their bodies were taken, whether they were buried, nobody knows up to now. So it was a top state secret, and the efforts to trace where their bodies were buried or were taken to have proved futile. Their families have tried after governments changed, but we can't trace. So you can see that history has suffered there in terms of where these people were taken to. Others talk about their bodies being thrown in the river to be eaten by crocodiles, but that cannot be proven. And no one has come forward to say this is what happened. At least for Che Guevara, it was the same experience, but later on, around 97, they discovered where he was buried. From 1967 to 1997, people came forward and they managed to locate exactly where he was buried. But for these ones, and even for those that were tried and hanged after a trial at the High Court and then appeal Supreme Court, they were hanged, buried. Where they were buried, nobody knows up to now. So you can see how history suffered when it comes to the final resting places for these people. So in as much as we have tried to challenge the official narrative, but still we are left with the hangovers from the one-party state in terms of knowing the truth, where exactly the bodies were taken to. Yes, Chair, maybe I can stop there unless if there's there are further questions to the presentation or to what I've just said. Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc, for your very insightful talk. We really appreciate you making time to share your work with us, and we'll definitely call you again in the future to share some of your work. We have really benefited from this presentation, and thank you very much, colleagues. We've stayed up to the end. I know there are some few that have left for other commitments, but we really appreciate you making time to be with us. So thank you very much again, and do enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you very much, Doc.
Thank you. I also appreciate for the invitation, and I look forward for further engagements and platforms like this to engage more. Many thanks, and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, colleagues. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hope to see you again in the future for our weekly research seminar series. We will definitely invite you again for those that might want to be invited from next week onwards. You can share your email addresses, and we'll be able to add you to our mailing list. Thank you, colleagues. And
thank you, Doc. Thank you, colleagues. Goodbye.
Thank you, colleagues. Doctor.
Thank you. Afternoon, colleagues. Sorry, we just finished our seminar. Apologies, we just concluded the seminar a few minutes ago. But thank you very much for joining. Thank you, colleagues. We just concluded the seminar just now.